Jordan's childhood Christmas horror, The Unseen Intruder. It was Christmas morning in 2012, and young Jordan, just 6 years old, woke up with the kind of excitement that only a child on Christmas Day could have. The aroma of cinnamon and pine from the freshly cut tree filled the house, and the soft glow of twinkling lights reflected off the shiny, wrapped presents scattered beneath the tree. It was a child's dream come true. The room was filled with the magic of the season, and Jordan couldn't wait to dive into the holiday joy. His little heart raced as he ran down the stairs, eagerly shouting for his aunt and uncle. "Santa came," he announced, unable to contain his joy. His aunt and uncle, tired from the long night, were still in bed, but they smiled warmly at his excitement. Despite their fatigue, they humored him, getting up to join in the fun of opening gifts. The next hour was filled with laughter, wrapping paper flying through the air, and the sound of excited thanks for every new toy. The house was alive with the spirit of Christmas, a moment of pure happiness for Jordan, who had always felt more at home with his aunt and uncle than anywhere else, given the chaos of his early childhood. As the last gift was unwrapped and the room began to return to normal, Jordan took it upon himself to start cleaning up the mess of wrapping paper. It was then that something caught his eye from the corner of his vision, something out of place. For just a moment he thought he saw movement by the stairs. His heart skipped a beat. 2 pairs of shoes, no doubt belonging to someone he didn't recognize, appeared to be walking up the staircase. "Santa?" he thought to himself, his mind still filled with the wonder of the season. Excitedly, he dropped the trash bag and sprinted toward the stairs. Without thinking, he looked up at the top of the landing, expecting to see the familiar figure of Santa Claus, his jolly face and red suit. But what he saw instead sent a chill down his spine. There, in the dim light of the guest bedroom, was a shadowed figure. Someone was hiding behind the door, peering out just enough to be seen. Jordan's voice faltered as he pointed up toward the figure, telling his aunt, "Look, Santa's up there." His aunt, not quite believing what she was hearing, smiled at Jordan's imagination. But as she turned to look herself, the smile faded. What she saw was unmistakable, a person, crouched low, standing motionless at the top of the stairs, hidden in the darkness. The air grew thick with tension as the realization set in. This was no holiday surprise. Screaming, Jordan's aunt grabbed him by the hand and pulled him away from the stairs, her voice frantic as she shouted for his uncle. "Call the police," she ordered. Panic surged in the house as the family scrambled to make sense of the situation. The police arrived swiftly. Their station wasn't far, and in a matter of minutes they were combing the house, looking for any trace of the intruder. But to their dismay, the figure was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks or windows. The house was secure. Yet someone had been there, and they had vanished without a trace. Days passed and the family tried to move on, but the eerie feeling lingered. It wasn't just the sight of the mysterious figure that unsettled them. It was the knowledge that something had been taken. A few valuable items had gone missing from the guest bedroom, a couple of $1,000s worth of jewelry and electronics. They hadn't noticed at first, but once they began going through the room, it was clear. Whoever had been there knew exactly what to take. 2 weeks later, Jordan's uncle ventured upstairs to fix a leaky pipe. What he discovered sent a shock wave through the family. In one of the guest room closets, he found something disturbing. A collection of kitchen knives stabbed into the wall, food wrappers scattered across the floor, and a sleeping bag rolled up neatly in the corner. Someone had been living there, hiding in plain sight. This discovery was chilling. The family had been eating their meals, unaware that someone had been consuming their food, using their supplies. The mystery deepened as they began to piece together the unsettling truth. Whoever had been in their home wasn't just a burglar. They were a squatter, someone who had been hiding in the attic or a hidden part of the house, biding their time and feeding off the family's resources. The fact that their dog hadn't noticed anything was even stranger. The house was typically a fortress of security, always locked up tight, always under watch. The dog was usually alert to any intruders, but it hadn't reacted at all. This led the family to believe that the intruder was someone they knew, someone who was familiar with the house, maybe even trusted by them. The thought that they might have welcomed this person in at some point, not knowing they were being taken advantage of, was deeply unsettling. Jordan never forgot that Christmas, the strange figure in the dark, the feeling of being watched. It was a Christmas morning that began with the wonder of presents and joy, but ended with a lingering, uneasy feeling that something was terribly wrong. In the weeks that followed, the family changed their habits. They installed extra locks, added security cameras, and made sure to check every nook and cranny of the house, but they never did find out who the squatter was, or what had happened to them. Some things, they realized, were better left unanswered. That Christmas morning, Jordan learned an important lesson about safety, trust, and the sometimes chilling reality that not all visitors are welcome, no matter the season. The Abandoned House Investigation, 1980s to 1990s. It was the dead of winter in the 1980s, and the snowstorm was relentless. The small, rural town in the south was blanketed by thick snow, with only the dim glow of street lights cutting through the dark night. For a group of local teenagers, this snowy evening was the perfect opportunity to explore the mysterious old house on the outskirts of town, a place that had always intrigued them, not just for its eerie abandonment, but for the strange rumors that surrounded it. The house had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. The windows were boarded up, the roof sagging with age, and the once pristine white paint now chipped and peeling. Some of the older locals whispered stories of strange happenings, of things moving in the windows, lights flickering at odd hours, and sounds in the night that couldn't be explained. But for the group of teens, these rumors only made the house more enticing. They had grown up hearing the stories, and now, on this particular night, they were determined to uncover the truth. Armed with night vision goggles that one of the boys had borrowed from his older brother, who was in the military, they set out into the thick snow, determined to investigate. The goggles were meant for hunting, but tonight they would be used for something far more sinister. As they crept toward the house, the wind howled through the trees, the branches creaking like the groans of some ancient creature. When they reached the edge of the property, they paused, the goggles trained on the house. At first, the scene was quiet, as still as the frozen world around them. But then a faint flicker of light appeared in the attic window, a small, almost imperceptible glow that seemed to pulse in the dark. One of the kids, Ben, squinted through the goggles and gasped. "Look," he whispered, pointing. "There's definitely something up there. It's not just a reflection or something. It's moving." They all stared, unsure of what they were seeing. The light flickered again, and then, to their horror, they noticed something else. Faint, dark shadows moving in the attic, as though someone or something was pacing around up there. The kids froze. The eerie silence of the snowstorm seemed to deepen, and for a moment, none of them could move. The sense of dread that washed over them was palpable. After a few tense moments, they made the decision to retreat, but not without a sense of unease. They knew they had to come back. They had to know what was really going on. The next day, they returned to the house. The snowstorm had passed, leaving the world glistening in a blanket of fresh white. The house loomed before them, as silent and ominous as ever. This time, however, they weren't content to just observe from the outside. They had to see what was in that attic, the place where they'd seen the shadows move. They approached cautiously, their breath visible in the cold air, hearts pounding with both excitement and fear. The front door creaked ominously as they pushed it open, the smell of mildew and rot hitting their noses. Dust covered everything, the air thick with the staleness of a place that had been abandoned for years. They crept through the house, their flashlights illuminating dark corners and shattered furniture. There was no sign of anyone, just the silence of a forgotten home. They finally reached the stairs to the attic, which seemed to groan under their weight as they ascended. The attic door was slightly ajar, as though it had been disturbed recently. The group exchanged nervous glances, but no one backed down. They pushed the door open and stepped inside. What they found was beyond anything they had imagined. In the center of the attic, under the dim light from their flashlights, was a gruesome scene that made their stomachs turn. A bloody lamb, its small body twisted and contorted in an unnatural position, was nailed to a wooden cross. Its fur was matted with dark red stains, and the blood had dried into a grotesque pattern on the floor beneath it. The room was filled with a thick, metallic smell, and the walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn hastily with what appeared to be more blood. The kids stood frozen, unable to speak, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. Was this some kind of ritual, or was it a sick prank? They didn't know, but they knew one thing for certain. They needed to get out of there. They bolted from the attic, their hearts pounding in their chests. Once outside, they rushed to the home of their friend, Jake, whose father, a former military man, was someone they trusted. Jake's father, a no-nonsense kind of guy, immediately took the situation seriously. He had heard the stories of the house over the years, but had always dismissed them as folklore. Now he knew something was wrong. He grabbed his gun and headed to the house with the kids. When they arrived, the house felt even more ominous than before. Jake's father swept through the rooms, his military training evident in the way he moved with purpose. But when they reached the attic, they found nothing. The lamb was gone. The symbols on the walls had faded, almost as if they'd never been there. There was no blood, no trace of what the kids had seen. It was as if the house had swallowed up the evidence in the time they had spent reporting the incident. Jake's father called the police, but when the authorities arrived, they found no physical evidence to support the kids' claims. There were no signs of recent activity, no footprints in the snow, no bloodstains, and no trace of the lamb. The officers checked the attic, but it was empty. The investigation went nowhere. For years, the incident remained a mystery. The house was eventually demolished, and the property sat empty, forgotten by most of the town. But the kids who had witnessed it never forgot. They carried the memories of what they saw that day with them for the rest of their lives. The unanswered questions, the chilling sense that something dark had once lived in that house, stayed with them long after the snow had melted. Was it all just a trick of the mind, or had they truly witnessed something sinister? No one could say for sure. The only thing that remained was the feeling that, somewhere in the shadows of the past, the house still held its dark secrets. Unsettling atmosphere in a rural town. The small, rural town sat nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, far from the hustle and bustle of the nearest city. On the surface, it was a place that seemed peaceful, even picturesque, with its red brick town square, neat rows of old colonial homes, and church steeples rising above the trees. But beneath the facade of idyllic Americana, the town had a darker undercurrent, one that locals didn't often talk about. Strange happenings were part of its history, woven into the very fabric of the community, creating an unsettling atmosphere that seemed to grow thicker with each passing year. The narrator, a former resident who had moved away long ago but still occasionally visited, recounts the chilling stories that had long been whispered in the corners of the town's bars and at late-night gatherings. Stories of things that didn't make sense, of disappearances, unexplained fires, and bizarre, unsettling events that left a permanent scar on the town's collective psyche. Some of these stories had the air of urban legends, but others, the narrator believes, were grounded in something far more sinister. One of the town's most puzzling features was its unusual population. Though the town was small, it was frequently home to strangers, often transients, drifters, and outsiders who would stay for a few weeks, then disappear without a trace. Some were said to be harmless wanderers, others far more ominous. A few were even rumored to have ties to unsavory groups, traveling through the town for reasons that never quite became clear. It was always the same. They would show up unannounced, spend a few nights in the ramshackle inns or camp out in the woods, and then vanish as suddenly as they came. The townspeople rarely asked questions. They had learned long ago that curiosity could be dangerous. But it wasn't just the transient nature of the town's residents that set it apart. It was the way those who lived there seemed to turn a blind eye to the unusual events that regularly unfolded. Crime was not unheard of, but it was rarely investigated thoroughly. Local law enforcement, which was often stretched thin and underfunded, seemed less inclined to investigate mysterious occurrences. The sheriff's department was notorious for its lack of resources and ineffectiveness. Some even whispered that certain officials might be involved in the strange happenings themselves, if not outright ignoring them for personal gain. This lack of response from the authorities, coupled with the fear of drawing unwanted attention to the town, created a perfect breeding ground for rumors and paranoia. The rise of the satanic panic during the 1980s and 1990s only added fuel to the fire. As national media outlets spread stories of ritualistic crimes and occult activities, many in the town began to view the strange events around them through a lens of suspicion and fear. The line between the supernatural and the mundane began to blur, and the town's residents began to see dark forces lurking behind every corner. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in the late 1980s, when a series of mysterious fires erupted in the woods surrounding the town. At first, it was believed to be a string of accidental wildfires, a result of lightning strikes or careless campers. But when the fires kept recurring, becoming larger and more dangerous each time, the residents began to suspect foul play. Some began to whisper about strange symbols carved into the trees around the site of the fires, symbols that looked eerily similar to ancient occult markings. Others claimed to have seen figures standing by the flames late at night, their faces obscured by hoods, chanting in low voices. Rumors of satanic rituals soon spread like wildfire, and many locals began to worry that the fires were not accidents at all, but deliberate acts of dark worship. The tension in the town reached a boiling point, and yet the authorities remained silent. With their limited resources and growing unease, the police dismissed the growing suspicion as paranoia. "There's no evidence of anything sinister," the sheriff famously remarked, "just kids playing with matches." But for the townspeople, it was never just kids. They could feel the heavy presence of something darker, something more insidious lurking just beneath the surface. The town's isolation only added to the feeling of being trapped in a place where no help would come. Those who tried to escape the growing sense of dread often found that the road out of town was long and treacherous, especially in the winter months when snowstorms could cut off all access. And once the town's reputation for strange happenings began to spread, it seemed like no one was ever truly safe. Visitors would come, but they often left with uneasy expressions, as though they had glimpsed something they weren't meant to see. A few even left in a hurry, without a word, as if fleeing from something just beyond the town's edge. Over time, some of the town's older residents, those who had lived there long before the satanic panic had taken root, began to see a pattern emerging. They recalled other unsettling events from decades past: strange noises in the night, unmarked graves in the woods, disappearances that were never fully explained. They spoke of a time when the town had been vibrant and full of life, but something had shifted. The darker energies that had once been confined to the edges of the community seemed to have crept in, slowly suffusing every corner of the town, infecting its very soul. The narrator recalls a chilling story from a local historian, one of the last people to study the town's history, before the town's archives mysteriously vanished in the early 90s. The historian had spoken of a time long before the arrival of the first settlers, when a different kind of people inhabited the land, a people whose practices were shrouded in secrecy and fear. The town's ancestors, it was said, had made deals with darker powers, trading their souls for prosperity. The historian had cautioned that the roots of the town's mystery lay far deeper than anyone realized, that the very land the town sat on had a dark history, one that had never been fully understood. And that history, the historian warned, was slowly rising to the surface. Years later, as the narrator drives through the town again, the streets look almost the same as they did in their youth. The buildings stand untouched, though now empty and forlorn, like monuments to forgotten lives. But the air is different. The weight of the town's past hangs heavy in the silence, and the sense that something unspeakable still lingers in the shadows is palpable. Every glance at the empty houses, the overgrown streets, the woods on the edge of town, all of it feels like a reminder of the mysteries that were never solved, the things that were left unsaid, the darkness that no one dared to confront. The town's unsettling atmosphere is not just the result of isolated incidents or fleeting rumors. It is something much deeper. It is the product of years of denial, of secrets buried beneath layers of history, of a place that has grown so accustomed to the strange and the sinister that it can no longer distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. And for those who call it home, it is a place that whispers its haunting stories to anyone who dares to listen.